Friday, everybody. Hi, Freddie. Hey, you've had a nice day. Hi, Mrs. Henderson. Albie's found a patch of sun outside the window. Oh, he was sunbathing a minute ago, now he's chasing something. Oh, Freddie, you've been on a bike ride, went to see Jack and your auntie. Oh, that's great. Oh, and there is Jack, right after your comment. Oh, that's so nice that you went to see him. That is lovely. That's so nice now that we can see people in the fresh air, isn't it? Hi, Mrs. Green. Hi, Mum, again. My mum was stressing because she was here, sat in the garden until about 7 minutes ago. She didn't know she'd make it back in time. So, where have we got to? Oh yeah, they ate the tarantulas. That was the last chapter. Oh, hi, Maria. Hi, Miss Potter. So they ate the tarantulas and they're going to plan their trip to get to Manaus by boat. So this chapter is called Twice Fried Oiseau Spectacle. Or Spectacular, maybe, if it's French, because oiseau, I know it's backwards, is bird in French. I know that much. So, who knows? And there's some kind of fire in the middle, look. That night, Fred, Lila and Con formed a conclave. They sat in a tight circle around the fire, their heads close together, planning in whispers. Max lay on his back on the stones and decorated himself with the small clover-like plants growing at his feet. Bacchus sat on Lila's lap, watching with careful eyes. just watching Albie sunbathing. Hi, Mrs. Wood. I think we should cook something for him, said Lila, gesturing with her chin towards the statues and the vines. Then he might help us again. Yes, said Con. Men love food. No, I don't want him to take my ears, said Max. He was joking, Max, said Lila. We hope, muttered Con, but for once she said it under her breath. That sounds great, but we can't really cook, said Fred. You don't get to have an opinion, said Con haughtily. If it weren't for you, we wouldn't have to worry about him. Anyway, good cooking is simply paying attention and taking your time. She spoke as if reciting. Albie's lying really near the road. I know he's fine, but every time a car goes past, he's lying right next to the road. Cars go very slowly. It's a daredevil. I like that. Who told you that? Asked Lila. My gym teacher. Are gym teachers famous for being good cooks? Asked Fred. Mr. Lawson over the road. He scratched a mosquito bite and winced as it began to bleed. No, she was a terrible gym teacher too. She made us walk around the gym pretending to be riding a horse. She said it would be good for our self-confidence. Was it? What do you think? Lila grinned. We still have those berries, she said. We could roast them for him, with some of the leftover bird. They looked at the bird. It had dried out a little in the sun. It smells very, very leftover, said Con. At home, said Lila, we have refried beans from the day before. Mama makes them with spices. It's delicious. Her smile faded a little at the word Mama. Con looked for a long second at Lila, then briskly got to her feet. I'll find a stone we can use as a frying pan, she said. We could call it twice fried bird spectacular, said Lila. I told you it was bird. Twice fried oiseau spectacular, said Con. That's French. Posh food is always in French. A sudden sound made them stop talking. From the far side of the square, in among the vines, came a roaring. It sounded like a bear, or a tiger, or an engine, or a human in pain. Lila reached for Backer on her shoulder. Is that him? The sound stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Maybe he goes there to scream, to roar? Maybe that's what he's doing, asked Con. I'd quite like a room I could scream in. They sat in silence for many minutes, but the noise didn't come again. They returned to the food. The vulture approached. He sat on Max's shoe and watched balefully as they cooked, apparently resenting that they hadn't offered him any. I didn't know vultures could look so much like ants, said Con. Albie, you gonna come in? Hiya! Al flirting with the neighbours. And the dogs. When the explorer finally reappeared, though, he seemed to have forgotten they were there. He looked briefly startled, then nodded at them, as if to commuters sharing a train, and was turning away without a word when Max ran after him, weaving in and out of the young shoots growing up between the stones of the city floor. Come back, said Max. It was an order, not a request. We cooked you food. The explorer looked surprised. What? Oh, that's very generous, but I won't, thank you. You have to. We made it specially. The explorer crouched down in front of Max. I applaud your decision to move commandingly through the world, but you have vulture poo in your hair, which dents your gravitas. Please? Oh, he's back. Come back in from tormenting the neighbours. Sorry about that. Please, said Lila. She had moved silently across the square, approaching him as you would a wild animal. That noise is Mr. Lawson. Backer looked out through Lila's hair. Please just try it. She held out a leaf on which was laid some of the bird and some roasted berries. They'd tried to make it look as much like a restaurant plate as possible. Due to an accident involving the vulture and Max's elbow, the meat was more covered in ash than any of them had planned, but Fred thought he could still make out what it was supposed to be. "It's twice fried wazoo," said Max. "It's special." "Well, thank you," said the explorer. He took a bite. Then he gave an exclamation and spat it into a bush. "Good heavens! That tastes like being punched in a graveyard." Oh, sorry," said Lila, her voice very small. "We wanted to do something that you'd like, so we—" "Please don't cut off our ears," said Max. "No, I apologise. It was a kind thought." The explorer touched the ring on his little finger. "I had rather forgotten how kind children can be." Then he shook his head so hard that his shock of hair flicked sweat onto the stones. He turned, giving a half bow. "You'll forgive me. I must light a fire before dark." He paced to the far side of the square, close to his hammock, and knelt among the branches. It took him less than a minute to get the flames sparking from the wood. He moved so fast and with so much assurance that it was impossible to follow his hands. He took a fish from his pocket and set it on a 3-cornered spit. The vulture kept close to his ankles. He sat down and squatted by the fire. Fred watched from a corner of his eye, while the others grimly attempted to chew the twice-burnt bird. The explorer sat, his elbows on his knees, staring at nothing. "Do you think he's all right?" Fred whispered. "He looks, I don't know, sad?" Con looked over. "He kills snakes with rocks. That sort of person doesn't get sad." As they spoke, the explorer rose and crossed to a pile of coconuts at the foot of a tree. Each had been sliced open at the top and then had the lid replaced. The explorer drank deeply from one, threw away the shell and picked up another. After his third, he turned suddenly to the children. "Do you drink?" he called across the square. "It depends on what sort of drinking," called back Con. "Cachaça, my own version. Try some." They crossed the square warily, keeping a close eye on the vulture. Lila slipped Bacca down the front of her sweater and laid a protective hand on his head, and the other on Max's shoulder. They hovered, the 4 of them, on the edge of the light cast by the fire. Fred bent his knees to sit, but none of the others did, so he tried to make it look as if he were testing his joints. "Sit down, boy," said the explorer. "All of you. Do you not know what God gave you arses for? Here, drink this." "What is it?" said Fred. "Sugar cane, coconut milk, and some other things. Herbs." "What kind of herbs?" asked Lila. "Have you ever drunk anything that tastes like it will either kill you or make you immortal? That's this." Fred took a mouthful, then doubled over, coughing. It tasted of nothing, really, only hot and burning. It made his nose and eyes stream. "More?" said the explorer. "No, thank you. It tastes too much like being electrocuted." The explorer laughed. The laugh had thorns in it. "You'll like it better when you're older." Con sniffed the liquid. "Is it alcohol?" The explorer shrugged. "Technically, yes, but not the way you're thinking. It doesn't taste like wine, or have the same effect." Con shook her head. Lila, to Fred's surprise, reached for the coconut. "Just so I know. If I want to be a scientist, I need to experiment." She drank. Bacca tried to drink too and had to have his upper body fished out of the coconut. Lila shook her head vehemently. "It tastes like puking, the wrong way round." The explorer grunted. "Ungrateful baggage." He took the fish from the spike, laid it on a stone, sliced it down the middle, and cut out 4 chunks from its flesh. "Eat this. Better than that horrendous nightmare of a bird you concocted." The fish was hot and rich. It was unexpectedly meaty in flavour, smoky and bold. Fred ate his in 2 bites and looked hopefully at what was left. "Piranha," said the explorer. "The older they are when you catch them, the more they taste like chicken." The explorer seemed surprisingly disposed to talk. He made a sweeping gesture with his hand, hit the vulture in the chest, and sloshed some of the coconut's liquid over the bird. "Tell me, what do you think of this?" "The vulture," said Con doubtfully. Her voice took on the tone that voices take when asked to comment on a newborn baby, when that baby is self-evidently, horrifyingly ugly. "It's nice. It smells very original." Of the city, of the jungle. They call it the Green Hell. Did you know that? Fred stared at the vast expanse of stone, at the green ceiling high overhead. They call the jungle the Green Hell because it is lacking in grand pianos. Men, and when I say men, I mean idiots, used to come out here with pianos on the backs of elephants, and they used to be angry when their teacups broke in the storm. He grunted. But if you're willing to have a roughish, wildish kind of life, I find it closer to heaven than to hell. The explorer began to drink from another coconut shell. He sighed, and his eyes became misty. There's a lot written about love at first sight, and what is love at first sight but recognition? It's instant knowledge that this is a person who will make your heart larger, a lover, a child. The same applies to places. It's why I wanted to seek them out. It's why they need protecting. He stared, his eyelids a little uneven, at Fred. Fred stared at the fire, avoiding his gaze. There was a quality in this place that worked like flint on his insides. It was the light and the vastness of it, and the sun, and the green. He could see why other people might feel it was too green, too loud, too endless, too much. But for him, it felt like a trumpet call to a part of him he had not known existed. Fred's face must have shown something of what he was thinking. The explorer hammered his coconut on the ground. I can tell that you are falling in love with this place. How do you not yet see why it must be a secret? How do you not see how mad it would be to gamble with such beauty? Fred hesitated. He could not keep it secret. It was impossible. The world deserved to know about this much beauty. The headmaster would call an assembly and call him a hero. But he'd never seen anyone as utterly sure of anything as the man in front of him. I don't understand, said the explorer under his breath. Speech is dangerous. Some of the most interesting things I have said, I realised later I did not have a right to. Then abruptly he changed tack. He became brisk. You said you followed my map. Does that mean you encountered the bees? Yes, said Lila. We borrowed some of their honey. She explained how Max had seen the monkeys and the ants. The explorer nodded. I used to do the same. Bees make good allies. I used to get the tobacco pouches made specially by a man in the Burlington Arcade. I spent a lot of time in those parts of the jungle, but it doesn't do to be without tobacco for too long, and you can't carry too much on your person without attracting more attention from jaguars than is practical. I have tobacco pouches stationed across the whole sweep of the river. By the way, did you meet my dolphins? Yes, said Fred. We didn't know they were yours. The explorer hiccuped. They're good creatures, dolphins, he said, his voice tripping over itself. I used to feed them sardines. I worry it was a mistake, though. They trust too easily. It's a mistake to trust too easily. And then there was the fire, said Lila. A bad one. And so we came here. We thought it was the least mad risk. That's exactly it. The explorer was becoming emphatic. He emphasised some of the cachaça over Fred's knees. Fred tried not to laugh. Take risks, said the explorer. That's the thing to do. Get to know what fear feels like. Get to know how to manoeuvre around it. But, he paused to drink again. But, asked Lila. But make sure the risks you take aren't taken to impress someone else. Fred frowned. It sounded like the kind of thing the masters said at school. That's the way people end up with jaguars chewing at their collarbones, and nobody to love them for it. He wiped his eyes and stared at them. Risks. Jaguars, said Con. Noted. I took a risk once. I loved someone. 2 people, a woman, and we had a child. Did you know? We didn't know, no, said Lila gently. She exchanged a glance with Fred. I lost that gamble. I lost them. He sat down on the coconut and closed his eyes in a long, exhausted blink. But I am glad to have made the wager. Did you? Began Lila. I loved like I was unhinged, he said. His voice was rough. I came at love like a child making up arms. I worked out how to blink her name in Morse code. He gave a drunken grunt of laughter. Ha! I was very young, he said. People do not tell you that love is so terrifying. It is less like rainbows and butterflies and more like jumping onto the back of a moving dragon. Fred hesitated, wordless, but wanting to say something that would be large enough to meet the taut pain in the man's face. Before he could say anything, the explorer drank again, finishing the coconut in 2 immense gulps. Do you all do nothing but stare? I thought children gambled and frolicked. Do some gollicking, Framble. Fred looked at the others. He had no idea how to gamble. He believed it involved running in circles with your arms in the air and lifting your knees as high as they would go, which was not, he thought, something that seemed sensible in the circumstances. I don't think we're really the frolicking sort, said Fred. Disappointing, said the explorer. Are you drunk? Asked Con. Of course not, he belched reproachfully. I'm just perhaps the world itself is drunk. The jungle is a little more blurred than usual. I think that stuff must be strong, said Fred. That is impolite. I resent the implication. Sorry. Good, the explorer slurred. I like people best when they're silent or sorry. Do you need... began Lila, but he closed his eyes and turned away from them. My head aches. I can't look at you in the voice. I shall sleep now. He lay down on the stone ground and closed his eyes. A noise like a motor car began to come from somewhere deep within his chest. Moving on the tips of their toes, the children returned to their own fire. As the dark spread over the city, a swarm of mosquitoes appeared. One of them got caught inside Fred's nose and bit his nostril. Is there a way to get rid of the mosquitoes? Said Con. I think smoking keeps them away, said Lila. Some of the men my parents work with do it. I heard that smoking makes you less hungry, said Con. We could try, said Fred, scratching his nose. He rolled up leaves and Lila filled them with shredded grass and lichen, and Con lit them. Is this like real smoking? Gasped Lila. Hot, acrid smoke billowed into Fred's eyes. I've never tried. Does smoking taste a bit like a garden dyed in your face? He said. I think so, said Con. From the smell. Then I suppose yes, said Fred. He discreetly put his cigarette out inside a big, empty snail shell. It didn't seem worth the feeling that his tongue was about to drop out of his mouth. Fred looked at the two girls, who were both spitting disgustedly into the fire. He'd never really known any girls his own age, but both Lila and Con could spit as far as any boy at school. Their spit had commitment and impact. He saw them grin at each other in the firelight. It was a peculiar night, that night. Fred's thoughts kept returning to the man lying asleep by the fire at the other side of the ruined city square, and to his lost son and wife. The explorer was so alone, living with only the green and the birds and the endless jungle. But, Fred thought, it wasn't as if he was so much less alone himself. The thought made him shiver. He felt something touch his ankle. He jerked away, thinking of tarantulas, but it was a hand, Con's hand, gripping his ankle in her sleep. He hesitated. Then he reached down and pressed his thumb on hers. He hoped the touch said, We'll be all right. It will all be all right. It was hard to be specific with thumbs, but it must have worked a little, because she grew still and her breathing became heavy and regular. Lila muttered in her sleep. Backer lay entangled in her long dark hair. Fred looked up at the vine roof above him, scanning it for snakes, and then, his flint tight in his palm, he allowed himself to close his eyes. Ooh, it's another dark page, look. And this chapter is called Fishing in the Dark. Oh, hi, Ryan's watching. Hi, Ryan. Oh, and hi, Holly. Hope you're okay, Holly. Ryan, you've been doing TTRS. Nice one. I think there's a battle on this week, isn't there? Is it Boys Against Girls in Year 5? I think so. Fishing in the Dark. The explorer hadn't moved by the time the sun rose. He lay snoring where they'd left him, a beetle perched on his chin. Max woke up first and kicked Fred in the crotch as he scrambled to his feet. Max scratched himself all over and then went running across the stone square, shook the explorer's shoulder and sat down on top of him. The explorer startled awake. Fred flinched, remembering what the man had said about his startle reflex, but he merely looked mildly, politely appalled. Can I eat this? Max asked. He thrust a handful of grass into the explorer's face. The explorer shifted Max gently onto the floor, sat up and began to blow on the fire. No, you can't, he said. You didn't even look. The chances are that the answer is yes are so slim. The chances that the answer is yes are so slim. He looked up. That's poisonous. No. Definitely poisonous or only maybe? Definitely. Oh, and this? He held up the explorer's chin beetle, which had fallen on the ground. You could eat that, said the explorer. He gently took the beetle from him. But the max of 2 hours from now would not thank you. As a rule of thumb, it's best not to eat things that are still moving. But I'm hungry. It's only moving a tiny bit. I would still emphatically discourage it. What does that mean? It means no. Oh. Max lay down on his back. He didn't cry, but his face looked blank and older than it should be. Quietly, under his breath, he began to sing to himself in Portuguese. Fred scraped some dew from the leaves above him and used it to clean his face. He looked over at Max, properly looked, for the first time in days. The boy was growing thin, his cheekbones stuck out under his eyes. Lila worked hard to make him look cared for and clean, but he had a snail trail of snot across his face and green dust in his eyebrows. The explorer was also looking down at Max. His face was shaping itself into peculiar expressions. His eyes were bright and his mouth tight. Abruptly, he rose to his feet. His voice was brisk, artificially, unconvincingly brisk. What you all sitting about for? Time is precious. Shouldn't you be preparing for your journey? But how exactly? We don't know what to do, said Con. Her voice was almost a whine. Lila shot her a look. The explorer's expression was very dry. If you have a preference for surviving, you'll need to know how to spear fish. There have been expeditions when the men and I survived on fish for half a year. Max's face lit up. Fish? Right now? Tonight. There's a small lake not far from here. But I'm hungry now, said Max. It needs to be dark. You can spend the day making spears. I tried that, said Fred. He sapped away a mosquito, but the vines I used to tie the flints on kept breaking off. Vines? The man looked shocked. You don't use vines to secure a spear. That would be like using packing tape to build a steam train. Idiot boy. You use intestines. Where are the guts from your bird? Intestines. Con pointed to the jungle where they'd buried the intestines and other rejected bits at a safe distance. Dig them up and heat them over the fire and use them as string. He made a winding gesture as if tying a knot. And don't bother me until then. He turned abruptly, they were getting used to it now, and strode away towards the far end of the courtyard, towards the tangle of vines that cut off the corner of the square. They undug the intestines. They were not a pretty sight, and being buried hadn't improved them. Con washed them in a half coconut, and Lila and Fred began laying them out on the stones, trying not to look too hard at the semi-translucent tubes. Max tugged at Lila's ankle. Lila, did you hear that? What? The air was silent, bar the constant whir of the insects in the tree above them. Then Fred jerked his head round. It was that same roar he'd heard before, choking through the air. It's coming from there, from behind the vines, he said. I'm going to go and see. No, said Con. He said, don't bother me, and I happen to think that if a person who wears claws for cufflinks says that, you should do what he says. But what if he's being eaten? Said Fred. Surely then it doesn't count. Lila shook her head. I agree with Con. Con looked round in surprise. Really? Whatever it is, he doesn't want us to know, and we can't afford to make him any more angry. Lila turned with unexpected firmness towards the fire. Let's make those spears. Reluctantly, Fred sat down. The morning was a sticky one, and nobody smelt better by the end of it. The intestines weren't easy to empty, and the process of heating them over the fire to harden them felt unexpectedly medieval. This is not how I pictured fishing, said Con. I thought it was all old men sitting around on riverbanks telling people to be quiet, like river librarians. Fred opened his mouth to reply, but the guts dripped and spat hot fat at his teeth, so he shut it again. He wondered if his fingers would ever lose the faint scent of dead bird. But by the time the sun began to set, he had a long-handled spear with a flint glinting in the light. Lila's spear was strong and straight, but the wrapping around the flint had gone awry where Backer had tried to get involved in the process and covered himself in grease. Con's spear was the neatest. Her hands were competent and controlled, even with bird gut. Fred went in search of water to wash the grease off his arms. Some of the stones had hollows that collected enough rainwater to wash a small patch. He moved from stone to stone across the citadel, gradually shedding the worst of the burnt grease smell. As he came back, he heard voices. The explorer was kneeling on the ground, bent over his pith helmet. Lila crouched next to him. "You have to be gentle with his knees and elbow joints," the explorer was speaking, his voice low. "They're still very fragile at this age." Lila nodded. "I know." She reached into the pith helmet. "I can feel it. When he moves, they're so light, like seagull bones." "Make sure you check under the armpits for parasites. There." Bacca's head reared up and over the edge of the helmet, and he let out a wail of protest. The explorer gave something approaching a smile. "He's being unnecessarily dramatic. The water's good for him. Now, hold him by his forearms." They're obviously giving Bacca the sloth a bath in the helmet. "Like this?" Lila lifted Bacca from his bath, dripping, his legs dangling. "Yes, check his stomach for ticks." Lila checked, brushing her fingers over the sloth's belly, her eyes squinting with care. "There's nothing." Bacca's fur was plastered against his skull, and his eyes were wide with the affront of it. He gave a squawk as he hung from Lila's hands. "Now you need to dry him." Swiftly, Lila unplaited her hair. It fell in an uneven wave to her waist. She lifted the sloth into it and rubbed him gently. Bacca snuffled among the deep brown curls. Fred saw Con, inside the stone room, give the ghost of a smile. Max was half asleep, his head on Con's lap. The explorer raised his eyebrows. The corners of his mouth lifted half an inch. "I doubt that particular strategy would be suggested in veterinary college, but good." The sun was dipping over the top of the statue of the panther. The explorer looked up and saw Fred watching. He sprang to his feet, as if embarrassed to be caught mid-kindness, his bad leg catching on his good one. Suddenly brisk again. "Right, are you ready to go? You each need to take some fire with you. The fish eyes shine red in the light. Find slow-burning wood, something dense, or it'll burn down too quickly." They set off in single file through the dark trees, each carrying a burning branch. Bacca rode, still slightly damp, inside Lila's shirt. The explorer moved without a single rustle. The rest stumbled behind him, stubbing their toes on unseen roots. A branch whipped in Fred's face, and the leaves blackened in the flames of his torch, but the wood was too green to catch fire. "Don't burn down the jungle, please," said the explorer, without turning round. Fred found to his surprise that the dark no longer seemed threatening. It still made his skin tingle, but the pitch-black shadows under the trees no longer bit at his stomach in the same way. The change had been so slow he hadn't felt it come. "There are ant mounds everywhere here," said the explorer. "Nothing too bad. The only dangerous ants are the bullet ants. But you don't want to disturb them if you can help it. I was attacked by a colony once when I was asleep. It looked like my whole body was covered in warts." "Oh," said Lila. "Wow. Quite not good for the morale." They went in a new direction, northwest, down a steep incline. Every time their branches burned down to their hands, they pulled new ones from the trees and lit them. Twice Fred lost his footing and slid until he came up against a tree. Max tripped, ate a mouthful of mud, and they had to pause until his screaming died down enough for him to walk on. Lila tried to comfort him. The explorer turned away and studied a dung beetle with angry intensity. The lake, when they came upon it, was larger than Fred had expected. The trees that grew all around it had spread their roots under the water. The explorer took off his shoes and waded in, knee-deep. "Come on, quickly," he said. "What are you waiting for?" And we're going to leave it there for today. See what happens when they wade into the lake and see if they catch some fish with the spears that they've made. Night fishing with homemade spears sounds pretty good. We're making quite good progress. That's the only bit we've got left of the book, so see what happens next time. We will be back on Monday at 5:30 normal time. I'm just going to turn the camera around and say bye-bye from Fat Albie. Hope everybody has a nice weekend, and I will see you on Monday.